The today's topic is Doppler effect. So what is the Doppler effect? If a wave source and receiver that means observer, are moving relative to each other, the frequency observed by the receiver, that is suppose f dash, is different from the actual source frequency, that is f. This phenomena is called the Doppler effect. That means if source and observer are moving, the frequency of observed by the receiver is different from the actual source of the frequency. That effect is called Doppler effect. If source and receiver both are stationary, then frequency of source and observer is same. But if they are moving with a relative motion to each other, then frequency of observed by the receiver is different from the actual frequency of source. So we will take different cases in which the source and observer move along the line joining them. So like suppose let v is speed of sound in medium, that is with respect to ground, and vs is, that is velocity of source in medium, and vo is velocity of observer in medium. Now we will take the different cases in which source and observer move along the line joining. So we will take a case first. So in case first, suppose source is moving and observer at rest. That is the first case. That means suppose that is the source and it is moving with vs velocity, and here is a observer. So observer is at rest. Now the if we see the frequency received by the observer, that is f dash, the frequency received by the observer when source is moving towards the observer will be v is the velocity of sound and f is the frequency of source. So observer frequency will be f dash, that means frequency received by the observer f dash will be f into v upon v minus vs when source is moving towards the observer. If let observer is here, it is at now source is moving with velocity vs, but now the source is moving away from the observer, so frequency observed by the observer will be f into v upon v plus s, because now the source is moving away from the observer. That means the frequency received by the observer will be less, so v plus vs is greater, that means f dash will be less. Now case second. Now the source at rest and observer is moving. That is the second case. That means that is the source is at rest and observer is moving with v naught velocity. So Now observer is moving away from the source. Now the frequency received by the observer will be, so now observer is moving away from the source. That means frequency received by the observer will be less. V minus V naught is a less. So V F dash will also be less. Now if source is rest and observer is moving towards the source with V naught velocity, then frequency received by the observer will be F into V plus V naught upon F is the frequency of the source and V is the velocity of sound and V naught is the velocity of observer. Now the third case is both observer and source are moving. So first, that is the source. It is moving with Vs velocity and observer is moving also V naught velocity. That means source is moving towards the observer and observer moving away from the source. Then the frequency received by the observer will be f dash is equal to f into v minus v naught upon v minus vs. That is the first condition. Now second one is, suppose source is moving towards the observer and observer also moving towards the source with velocity v naught. Then frequency received by the observer will be f into v plus v naught upon v minus vs. That is the second condition. Now third condition is, if source is moving with velocity vs and away from the observer and observer also moving with v naught velocity that is going away from the source. Now the frequency received by the observer will be v minus v naught upon v plus vs. Now in the fourth condition, if source is moving away from the observer with vs velocity and observer is moving towards the source with velocity v naught, then frequency received by the observer will be f into v plus v naught upon v minus v plus vs. So that is the four condition, that is all possible condition when both observer and source are moving. So these are the different frequency received by the observer when observer is moving and source is moving, and either source is moving or observer is moving. So that is the effect of the called is Doppler effect. Now the next topic is Doppler effect in light. So we know the what is the Doppler effect, the phenomena of apparent change in frequency, or we can say if frequency change then wavelength also change. So the phenomena of apparent change in frequency or wavelength of light due to relative motion between the source of light and the observer is called Doppler's effect in light. So there is a two type of effect, or there is a, due to the Doppler effect in light there is a Doppler shift. So what is the Doppler shift? Due to relative motion between light source and observer, there is shift, or we can say shift in frequency or wavelength. We know due to the relative motion of source and observer, there is a change in frequency or wavelength, or we can say there is a shift in frequency or wavelength of light, is known as Doppler shift. So Doppler shift is a two types. First one is the red shift. So what is the red shift? When a light source is moving away from observer, relative velocity v, then we know by the Doppler effect the frequency observed by the observer is less than the frequency of source. And we know when frequency is observed by the observer is less, then wavelength of will be greater. So we can say or wavelength and apparent wavelength is increase because frequency observed by the observer is less, so wavelength will be increased. Due to the increase of wavelength, that is called red shift, because wavelength is increasing, that means it is shifting towards the red. That means wavelength increasing, that means shift towards the red, because the wavelength of red is maximum. That's why it is called red shift, because frequency observed by the observer is less and frequency is less, that means wavelength will increase, and wavelength is increasing, that means it is shifting towards the red end of spectrum. That's why it is called red shift. Now the second one is the blue shift. So when a light source is moving towards the observer with relative velocity v, and then we know by the Doppler effect the frequency observed by observer is more than the frequency of source. So due to the increase of the frequency, the apparent wavelength will be decreased, because frequency is inversely proportional to wavelength. That means it is shift towards the violet end of the spectrum. So now wavelength is decreasing, and so this shift is called blue shift. That means when frequency observed by the observer is less, their wavelength will be increased, and it is called red shift when the frequency observed by the observer is more than frequency of source, then wavelength will be decreased, and this shift is called blue shift. Is it okay? Thank you.